Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Hello there.
Today, we're embarking on a journey into, well, one of history's most pivotal and frankly perplexing periods. We're looking at the origins and early trajectory of the Third Reich.
Yeah, trying to understand the complex forces that propelled Adolf Hitler to power and really set the stage for a global catastrophe.
And this isn't just recounting events, is it?
No, not at all. This is an opportunity for deep understanding. We're sifting through a monumental historical work, William Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich.
Shirer, of course, had incredible access, didn't he? Secret documents, interrogations.
Unprecedented access. It gives us this incredible lens to examine the why and how behind these moments, not just the what, but the mechanics underneath.
Right. So our mission today is to break down this intricate history step by step. We want to help you grasp not just what happened, but why it mattered.
And the lessons it offers, right, for understanding human nature, power, the fragility of peace, all of that.
Exactly. And get ready for some surprising facts and moments that really encourage critical thinking. We're not skipping over the difficult ideas here.
Absolutely not. Deep understanding requires tackling the tough stuff.
Okay, so to truly understand the actions of any leader, especially someone like Hitler, we really had to start at the very beginning, don't we?
You absolutely do.
What were the key experiences, the influences in his early life that started to shape his worldview, long before he was a political figure?
Precisely. It's vital to recognize that even the most, extreme ideologies don't just emerge in a vacuum. They're often rooted in personal experiences, frustrations, observations.
Things that then connect with broader societal currents.
Exactly. And Shirer shows us how Hitler's early life laid some very, very disturbing groundwork.
So let's begin with young Adolf's education. What was his experience in school like? How might that have affected him?
Well, his high school years were, frankly, a series of struggles. His marks were consistently poor.
Really? Not a good student?
Yeah. Not at all. It led to a forced transfer, and ultimately he dropped out at 16. Didn't even get a certificate.
Wow. And Shirer suggests this failure. It really bothered him.
Deeply rankled him, yes. Shirer notes that Hitler later used these personal frustrations to publicly ridicule what he called the academic gentry, the educated elite.
It almost sounds like these early school failures became a kind of persistent splinter for him, something that poisoned his view of traditional institutions, intellectual authority. Is that a fair way to see it?
That's a very apt analogy, yeah. Shirer certainly implies that this early sense of intellectual inadequacy, it festered. It contributed to his later disdain for traditional institutions, for sure.
And it wasn't just school troubles, was it? There was an illness, too.
Right. Around that same time, he suffered a lung ailment, serious enough that he needed a year-long break from school.
A whole year.
A whole year. And when he briefly returned, Shirer mentions this incident. At a celebration for leaving school, he got drunk. Apparently for what he claimed was the first and last time.
First and last time. Seems unlikely, but okay.
Well, that's his claim. But this single incident, seemingly minor, Shirer suggests it solidified a lifelong commitment. He became a teetotaler, non-smoker, vegetarian.
Which became part of his public image later.
Absolutely. Though Shirer notes it might have started out of necessity, as a penniless vagabond, but later became a matter of conviction.
So even these deeply ingrained personal habits, they had these rather humble, maybe even accidental origins. Necessity, a youthful mistake.
Yeah.
It really shows how personal experiences, even small ones, can solidify into these deeply held convictions.
And shape an entire life, an entire public image, definitely.
Okay, so this brings us to a really crucial period. His years in Vienna, 1907 to 1913.
Yes, absolutely pivotal. Shirer highlights this fascinating, almost paradoxical picture. On one hand, Hitler himself described these years as the happiest days of his life.
Happiest, really, given what came later.
His words. He apparently relished the freedom from having to work, saw it as escaping the hollowness of a comfortable life. He called himself a mother's darling.
So, avoiding responsibility.
Seems like it. He dreamed of being an artist, of course, failed the academy entrance exam twice, spent his days roaming the city, apparently declaiming his views on what was wrong with the world.
Talking to himself, basically,
Yeah.
or anyone who'd listen.
The image Shirer paints is more of internal monologue spilling out, and his evenings, often spent enraptured by Richard Wagner's operas, those mystic pagan works.
So a lot of passive, brooding, soaring fantasies.
Yeah.
Very detached from reality, it sounds like.
Very much so. And I recall Shirer mentions a boyhood friend's description.
Yeah, remembered him as a pale, sickly, lanky youth, usually shy and reticent, but capable of sudden bursts of hysterical anger against anyone who disagreed with him, which sounds familiar.
It does indeed.
And there was that story about the girl, Stephanie. He fancied himself deeply in love, but never made the slightest effort to meet her.
Right. Preferred to keep her in the shadowy world of his soaring fantasies. It really paints this picture, doesn't it? A detached, inward-looking young man.
Whose insecurities and frustrations were kind of coalescing.
Yeah.
Finding an outlet in this developing ideology, however horrifying.
Indeed. It's a critical period for understanding that synthesis. Personal grievances, ideological observations he's picking up, and this profound psychological projection. It all comes together to form his destructive Weltanschauung, his worldview.
You use the analogy of a dark echo chamber. I like that.
Yeah, where insecurities and frustrations just amplify existing societal prejudices. And it all solidifies into this coherent, though horrifying, ideology. There's a really potent example of the dangers of letting fantasy dictate reality, rejecting active engagement for passive, angry brooding.
He wasn't just brooding, though, was he? He was observing things, too, like that workers' demonstration.
Oh, yes, very shrewdly.
Mm-hmm.
He recounts witnessing a mass demonstration of Viennese workers, and he observed the tactics used, what he called the infamous spiritual terror and physical terror.
And he wasn't just disgusted, he was learning.
He was analyzing. He concluded these methods were based on precise calculation of all human weaknesses, and that their result would lead to success with almost mathematical certainty. Chilling, right? He's learning the tools of political manipulation.
And connecting with political movements.
His first political allegiance was to the Pan-German Nationalist Party, founded by Georg Ritter von Shirer.
What do they stand for?
Violent nationalism, anti-Semitism, anti-socialism, union with Germany, opposition to the Habsburgs and the Holy See. Hitler embraced it enthusiastically.
But he wasn't just a follower, even then.
No, he also coldly assessed the party's failures. Its inadequate appreciation of the importance of the social problem, its decision to enter parliament, which he saw as weak, and its struggle against the Catholic Church. He was thinking strategically, analyzing weaknesses.
And his anti-Semitism, which became so central, that also solidified in Vienna.
It seems so. He claims it initially was based on human tolerance towards different religions.
Which sounds unlikely, knowing him.
Well, that's his narrative. But he says it shifted after encountering what he described as an apparition in a black caftan and black sidelocks. This prompted the question in his mind, is this a German?
And that single encounter sparked something.
It led, he says, to a growing inner revulsion, a revulsion toward the conglomeration of races in Vienna. He saw the city as the embodiment of racial desecration because of its mix of Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Serbs, Croats, and, as he put it, everywhere the eternal mushroom of humanity, Jews and more Jews.
That language,
Yeah.
eternal mushroom, it's visceral.
It is. And it illustrates how existing, maybe abstract prejudice can become concretized, deeply personal, through a single encounter or observation, triggering that inner revulsion.
So this period is a really stark reminder, isn't it? How a young, disaffected person, prone to anger, prone to fantasy, can interpret the world around them.
And interpret political movements in a way that aligns with and then gets reinforced by existing prejudices. It really makes you ask, how susceptible are we ourselves to narratives that confirm our existing biases, even if they're distorted?
Okay, so Vienna was the crucible for his ideology. But then came World War I. What role did that play in his personal development?
Ah, the war. For Hitler, it offered something profoundly lacking in his earlier aimless existence.
Which was?
A profound sense of belonging and purpose. It gave him structure, camaraderie he hadn't known, a perceived path to honor.
And he served with some distinction, right? Decorated.
Yes, twice for bravery. He received the Iron Cross, second class, and then the coveted Iron Cross, first class, which was actually quite rare for a common soldier, a corporal.
So that must have boosted his self-image enormously.
Hugely. Now, some claims of his heroics, like single-handedly capturing 15 Englishmen or Frenchmen, Shirer notes those aren't confirmed by official records, but they speak to the image he cultivated, the wartime hero myth.
Right, and Shirer notes his peculiarities during the war.
Yeah, his comrades observed them. No letters or presents from home, never asked for leave, apparently showed no interest in women, never grumbled like the other soldiers.
Because for him, the war was home.
Quite literally, it seems. The war became his home. defined his identity.
So it wasn't just an event he lived through, it was a personal transformation.
Exactly. It gave him an identity, a mission, a stark contrast to the hollow freedom, the brooding of his Vienna years. It solidified his belief in himself and in the German nation he felt he was serving. The war provided this stark, violent validation for a man who had felt so adrift, so rejected before. It really prepared him, in a dark way, for what was to come.
Okay, so we have this ideologically charged, intensely self-motivated man emerging from the war. What kind of Germany did he find himself in? Shirer shows how political instability, economic hardship, this pervasive sense of national grievance, it created a vacuum, right?
A perfect storm, really. A vacuum that extremist movements were just eager to fill.
The conditions in post-war Germany were truly ripe for exploitation.
Absolutely. A nation in turmoil. And the new government, the Weimar Republic, it was born into a truly precarious situation.
Scherer tells us the proclamation of the Republic, November 9th, 1918. It was almost an accident, born out of trying to head off a Soviet-style revolution.
Pretty much. The leadership wanted to forestall the Spartacists, the far-left revolutionaries. Friedrich Ebert, a leader of the majority Social Democrats, he actually favored a constitutional monarchy. He famously declared, "I hate social revolution like sin."
That says a lot about its shaky foundations, doesn't it? Accidental, almost unwanted by some of its own founders.
It certainly does. Imagine trying to build a stable house, but the foundations are constantly shifting, cracks appearing from day one. That was Weimar. It inherited this deep sense of national humiliation from the war, plagued by internal divisions right from the start, inherently vulnerable.
And then came the Treaty of Versailles, 1919.
Ah, Versailles. Universally resented in Germany, seen as an intolerable dictated peace.
What were the specific points that fueled that resentment so much?
Well, it returned territories like Alsace-Lorraine to France, parts of Schleswig to Denmark, and crucially, it gave significant lands to the newly reformed Poland.
Which particularly angered Germans.
Hugely. Shirer points out that many Germans despised the Poles, whom they considered an inferior race. Losing territory to them was deeply galling. Plus, Germany was forced to accept sole war responsibility, the War Guilt Clause.
And the demands for war criminals, reparations.
Yes, and the military restrictions. Virtually disarmed, an army limited to 100,000 men. No planes, no tanks, the general staff outlawed, just a token navy. It was incredibly painful, incredibly humiliating.
But Shirer also makes a point that it wasn't total destruction.
That's important. He notes the treaty left the Reich geographically and economically largely intact. It preserved Germany's political unity and her potential strength.
So a treaty that was simultaneously humiliating and left Germany with the potential to rise again. That's a really complex and dangerous legacy, isn't it? Something nationalists could easily exploit.
Absolutely. A perfect recipe for resentment and future trouble. And within the very structure of the new government, there was this critical weakness, Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution.
Article 48, what did that do?
It conferred dictatorial powers on the president during emergencies, allowed the president to rule by decree, bypass parliament.
And it was used.
Oh, yes. Chancellors like Brüning, von Papen, von Schleicher, they used it repeatedly in the years before Hitler, effectively ending democratic parliamentary government even before Hitler officially took over. It was like a loaded gun just sitting there waiting.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How does a victor's peace, one seen as deeply unjust and humiliating by the losers, how does that contribute to future instability, to the rise of these revanchist movements?
It's a fundamental question. When you impose conditions that are seen as inherently unfair, you don't necessarily foster peace. You might just be sowing the seeds for the next conflict.
So into this volatile landscape, Hitler makes his entry into politics. How did that happen?
His first encounter with the German Workers' Party, which later became the Nazi Party, was actually through military orders. He was sent to investigate them.
So he was working for the army.
In a way, yes, army intelligence, keeping an eye on political groups. Initially, he was unimpressed. Just a small gathering in a Munich beer cellar, the Sternecker Bro.
But something clicked, right? Something changed his mind.
Yes. According to his own account in Mein Kampf, he was about to leave when some speaker, a professor, proposed that Bavaria should break away from Prussia and unite with Austria.
And Hitler reacted strongly.
This apparently roused him to a fury. He delivered this violent outburst against the idea, silencing the learned gentleman, and apparently this caught the attention of the party leaders. It was his first taste of public influence, his ability to sway a crowd, even a small one.
And he quickly started gathering key figures around him. Ernst Röhm, for example. He sounds like a really significant early ally.
Rome was absolutely crucial in those early days. He brought in large numbers of ex-servicemen and Free Corps volunteers. These guys formed the party's backbone. The SA, the stormtroopers, the brown shirts.
The muck.
Exactly. And Rome, being an army captain, he secured protection and sometimes the support of the authorities for Hitler. This allowed those early methods of terror and intimidation. Without Rome's connections, Hitler's early use of physical force might not have been tolerated.
And then there's Dietrich Eckart. Shirer calls him the spiritual founder of National Socialism. What was his influence?
Eckart was a fascinating character, a witty journalist, a mediocre poet, but with a troubled past, a drunkard, morphine addict, spent time in a mental institution.
Not exactly a stable influence.
No, but he preached Aryan superiority, the elimination of the Jews, the downfall of the swine in Berlin. He was looking for a specific kind of leader. He famously declared, "We need a fellow at the head, a worker who knows how to talk. He doesn't need much brains. He must be a bachelor, then we'll get the women."
That's incredibly cynical. And he saw that in Hitler.
He saw the raw material, the charisma, the ability to connect with crowds. He mentored Hitler, helped shape his public speaking, introduced him to influential circles in Munich.
So this really highlights again that Hitler wasn't necessarily inventing entirely new ideas, was he? He was more like a master synthesizer, an amplifier of existing grievances, existing fears.
That's a great way to put it. Think of him like a conductor, maybe a conductor of a very dark orchestra, assembling these disparate, often contradictory themes, nationalism, anti-Semitism, anti-communism, resentment, into this powerful, dissonant symphony.
And he intuitively understood the power of symbols, didn't he? The appeal of simple, strong narrative.
Absolutely. Which brings us to perhaps the most enduring symbol of Nazism, the Hakenkreuz, the swastika.
He specifically rejected the Weimar Republic's flag colors, right? Black, red, and gold.
Hated them. He opted for the red, white, and black of the old German Empire flag. He said they formed the most brilliant harmony in existence and were the colors he'd fought for, but they needed a new, potent form.
So he added the swastika.
Yeah.
And gave it a very specific meaning.
Yes, he declared. In red, we see the social idea of the movement. In white, the nationalist idea. In the swastika, the mission of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man.
Even though the swastika itself is an ancient symbol found all over the world.
Exactly. Troy, Egypt, China, Hindu, Buddhist traditions. It even appeared on the helmets of some post-war German Freikorps units, like the Ehrhardt Brigade. Hitler took this ancient, powerful symbol and just infused it with his own sinister, modern ideology. Gave it a new, terrifying potency.
Okay, so all these influences, the early political maneuvering, the symbolism, it all kind of culminates in the infamous beer hall putsch in 1923. What exactly happened there? And how did Hitler manage to turn what seemed like a huge failure into a personal triumph?
Right, the putsch, November 8th, 1923. Hitler got wind, or suspected, that the Bavarian state commissioner, Gustav von Kahr, along with the local army commander, General von Lossow, and the state police chief, Colonel von Seisser, might declare Bavarian independence or act against Berlin without him.
So he felt he had to preempt them.
He improvised a plan. They were all at a big meeting in the Burgerbräukeller, a large beer hall in Munich. Hitler stormed in with armed SA men, fired a pistol into the ceiling, and declared the national revolution had begun.
Dramatic entrance.
Very. He then forced Kahr, Lossow, and Seisser into a side room at gunpoint and pressured them to join his new national government. They reluctantly agreed under duress.
But it fell apart quickly, didn't it?
Almost immediately. The next day, a march towards the city center was met by police gunfire. 16 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed. The push collapsed. Hitler fled, but was arrested 2 days later.
So initially, a complete disaster, a major setback. But this is where Hitler's shrewdness, his opportunism, really comes through, isn't it?
Absolutely. He used the subsequent trial as a massive platform, like a magician turning a failed trick into something even more spectacular.
How did he manage that?
He recognized the trial, far from ending his career, would give him a national, even international spotlight. And crucially, the judiciary was sympathetic. The Bavarian Minister of Justice, Franz Gürtner, was a friend and protector, as Shirer puts it. The judges were lenient.
So he dominated the courtroom.
Completely. He gave this fiery 4-hour opening statement. He cross-examined witnesses himself. He turned the tables. He famously proclaimed, "I alone bear the responsibility, but I am not a criminal because of that. If today I stand here as a revolutionary, It is as a revolutionary against the revolution. There is no such thing as high treason against the traitors of 1918.
Blaming the leaders who signed the armistice and founded the Republic.
Exactly. He effectively shifted the public perception. He made Carr, Lasso, and Sicer look like weaklings or even complicit, sharing his guilt in a way. He turned his treason charge into an act of patriotism in the eyes of many nationalists.
So the legal system, which should uphold justice, it just became this powerful stage for political theater, for propaganda, and it catapulted this, previously fairly unknown agitator to national prominence.
It absolutely did. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can a public trial, which is meant to establish facts and uphold justice, be so effectively manipulated? How can it shape public opinion, even when someone is clearly legally culpable?
It's a profound question. And even afterwards, when he was writing Mein Kampf in prison.
Right. His publisher, Max Salman, hoped for a racy personal story, an inside story of the beer hall putsch.
But Hitler didn't deliver that.
No. Ever shrewd, Hitler included scarcely a word about the failed putsch in the book. He focused instead on laying out his broader ideology, his worldview. He understood how to control the narrative, even about his own failures.
Okay, so from the courtroom, Hitler moves into, literary infamy with Mein Kampf. Now we turn to what really became the philosophical core of Nazism, exploring these explicit and implicit ideas, however crude Shirer might find them, that became the guiding principles of the Third Reich.
Yes, it's vital to dissect this document, not as Shirer emphasizes for its intellectual merit, which he largely dismisses, but for its profound and terrible impact. It really served as Hitler's personal blueprint. It laid out his worldview, his future plans, in chilling detail.
And the title itself. His original idea was quite something, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. Tickles lightly. Not exactly. His publisher, Max Salman, recognized it was ponderous and unsaleable. He wisely shortened it to just Mein Kampf, My Struggle.
And it wasn't an instant bestseller, right?
Not at all. Initial sales were poor. Only about 9,500 copies in 1925, and sales actually decreased for the next 3 years.
So it changed.
Its popularity rose directly with the fortunes of the Nazi Party itself, especially after an inexpensive one-volume edition came out in 1930 as the party gained traction during the Depression.
So it wasn't really a book that created a movement, but a movement that created a market for the book. Interesting. What were its core ideas? What did it actually say?
At its absolute core, the book articulated this fanatical belief that Providence had chosen the Aryans, especially the Germans, to be the master race, the Herrenvolk.
The master race.
Yes. It outlined a future German state based purely on race, a state that would include all ethnic Germans living outside the Reich's current borders. And this state would be under the absolute dictatorship of the leader, meaning Hitler himself.
And the ultimate goal.
This state, he envisioned, would one day become Lord of the Earth. World domination, essentially.
Shirer's assessment of this worldview is pretty blunt.
He calls it a grotesque hodgepodge concocted by a half-baked, uneducated neurotic.
Grotesque hodgepodge. That's quite a dismissal of its intellectual value, yet it became so profoundly influential. How do we reconcile that?
Well, Shirer's point, and it's crucial, is that its importance lies not in its intellectual merit, but in its fanatical embrace by so many millions of Germans. And tragically, in the ruin of so many millions of innocent, decent human beings that it ultimately brought about.
So the ideas themselves might be crude, but their impact was devastating.
Exactly. Imagine a complex and dangerous machine, built from mismatched parts, maybe faulty logic, fueled by these irrational beliefs. Yet somehow it achieves its destructive purpose. The very crudeness, the emotional directness of Mein Kampf's ideas, rather than hindering them, actually made them profoundly accessible, potent, especially to a nation yearning for simple answers, for a return to glory after the humiliation of Versailles and the chaos of Weimar.
It's a chilling testament, isn't it? How often that basic human need for meaning, for simple answers, can be exploited by destructive ideologies.
And beyond this racial ideology, Mein Kampf also laid out a very clear, very aggressive foreign policy.
Right. What were Hitler's immediate targets outlined in the book?
First and foremost, he envisioned a reckoning with France. He described France as the inexorable mortal enemy of the German people.
Mortal enemy. Strong words.
Very. He believed France's aim was a dismembered and shattered Germany. And he argued that a final act of reckoning with France was absolutely necessary, not just for revenge, but to enable German expansion made possible elsewhere.
Clearing the path for bigger ambitions. And that expansion elsewhere, That explicitly meant eastward, didn't it?
Explicitly. In the East, largely at the expense of Russia. This is where the concept of Lebensraum, living space, becomes absolutely central.
Lebensraum. Explain that concept a bit more.
It obsessed him. He argued that the old German Empire, the Hohenzollerns, made a huge mistake seeking colonies overseas in Africa. He declared that Germany's territorial policy cannot be fulfilled in the Cameroons, but today almost exclusively in Europe.
So continental expansion was the goal.
Yes, and for him, the soil of Eastern Europe, particularly Russia, wasn't reserved for its current inhabitants. He wrote chillingly that this land exists for the people which possesses the force to take it.
That's just a brutal articulation of might makes right, isn't it? Cloaked in this pseudo-Darwinian justification of racial destiny.
Absolutely. It's not just a political plan, it's a worldview. It transforms conquest into a natural, almost biological imperative, a perverse kind of social evolution.
And if the current inhabitants, the Russians, the Slavs, objected.
His response was brutal and simple. Then the law of self-preservation goes into effect, and what is refused to amicable methods, it is up to the fist to take. Pure force.
And tied into this was his obsession with racial purity.
Deeply tied. He warned constantly against the Aryan giving up the purity of his blood through racial mixture. He believed this would lead to a loss of cultural creativeness, the very thing that made the Aryan race supposedly superior.
Now, Shirer makes a really compelling argument, doesn't he, that Hitler's ideas didn't just spring out of nowhere. He says Hitler's mind and the passion, all the aberrations that possessed his feverish brain, they had roots that lay deep in German experience and thought.
Yes, he argues strongly against the idea of Hitler as some complete anomaly. He points to historical precursors, cultural currents that might have made his message resonate.
Can you give us some examples Shirer highlights?
Certainly. One striking example he discusses is the Prussian Junker class. These were the landed aristocracy of Prussia, East Germany.
What were they like?
Well, Shirer describes them as hardworking estate managers, but ones who treated their landless laborers almost like virtual slaves. Unlike, say, the more cultivated nobles of Western Europe, Shirer argues the Junkers developed into rude, domineering, arrogant men, often without cultivation or culture.
And what values did they embody?
According to Shirer, a lust for power and domination, a passion for unbridled militarism, a contempt for democracy and individual freedom, and a longing for authority, for authoritarianism. This created a powerful, established archetype within German history, aggressive, anti-democratic leadership, a kind of fertile ground for Hitler's message.
And then there's Bismarck, the unifier of Germany. How does he fit in?
Otto von Bismarck. Shirer calls him the political genius and the apostle of blood and iron. He unified Germany by force through wars between 1866 and 1871. He created Greater Prussia, or Prussian Germany, which Shirer calls a problem child of Europe.
So Bismarck's methods taught a lesson.
A powerful one. That unity, power, national greatness could be achieved through ruthless force, through war. A lesson Hitler certainly seemed to take to heart.
There was also an intellectual tradition feeding into this, wasn't there? Thinkers who promoted similar ideas.
Yes, Shirer mentions Houston Stewart Chamberlain. Interestingly, an Englishman who became a naturalized German citizen and married Richard Wagner's daughter.
And what was his influence?
He greatly influenced Hitler with his racial theories. He wrote about the superiority of the Teutonic or Aryan race and had this burning sense of the destiny of the Germans and Germany. He preached that Germany must become the teacher, helmsman, and pioneer of the world. The Nazis later acclaimed him as one of their prophets. Hitler almost certainly encountered his writings early on.
So Shirer's argument is that these specific historical developments, the Junker mentality, Bismarck's unification by force, thinkers like Chamberlain, they provided a kind of pre-existing language, a framework for Hitler's ideas, made them resonate more within certain parts of German society.
Exactly. Ideas don't just spring into being. They often find fertile ground in existing cultural narratives, historical grievances, and intellectual traditions.
It makes you ponder, doesn't it? To what extent are individuals products of their historical and cultural context? And to what extent do they transcend it or twist it? And how can these historical narratives, even seemingly distant ones, be exploited, distorted, to justify present-day political ambitions and extreme ideologies?
Those are precisely the kinds of critical questions this history forces us to ask.
Okay, so we've seen the blueprint in Mein Kampf, the historical context. Now we move from the ideas to the implementation. Once Hitler gains power, how did the Nazis systematically dismantle democracy and seize total control?
Right, this is the phase of Gleichschaltung, or coordination. Totalitarian regimes, once in power, systematically infiltrate every aspect of society to ensure absolute control. And we see this unfold with terrifying speed and efficiency in Germany after Hitler becomes chancellor in January 1933.
The path to absolute power was incredibly swift, almost cunningly legal at first, wasn't it? The Reichstag fire, February 27, 1933. That was a critical turning point.
Absolutely critical, just days before crucial national elections. Whether the Nazis said it themselves or just expertly exploited it is still debated, but exploit it they did.
How so?
Hitler and Goebbels immediately blamed the communists. Goebbels initially dismissed the first reports of the fire as a tall tale, but once it was confirmed, they seized the opportunity, declared a state of emergency, used emergency decrees to suspend civil liberties, banned communist meetings, arrested opponents, created this climate of fear right before the vote. It was the perfect psychological setup for their next move.
And that next move was the Enabling Act, March 23, 1933.
Yes. The newly elected Reichstag convened not in the burned-out Reichstag building, but in the Kroll Opera House. Shirer vividly describes the scene. Brown-shirted stormtroopers, armed SA and SS men lining the aisles surrounding the building. An incredibly intimidating atmosphere.
Setting the stage for the vote.
Exactly. And the act itself, officially titled Law for Removing the Distress of People in Reich, was devastating for democracy.
What did it actually do?
It fundamentally transferred legislative power away from the parliament and directly into the hands of Hitler's cabinet for 4 years. Crucially, it allowed the government to pass laws that could deviate from the Constitution.
So it basically made the Constitution irrelevant.
Yeah.
Gave Hitler dictatorial powers legally.
Precisely. Hitler's speech proposing the act was apparently one of unexpected restraint, a kind of deceptive calm. But the armed stormtroopers sent the real message. This was a legal power grab, a legal coup.
It's a really chilling example, isn't it? Using the mechanisms of democracy to destroy democracy itself.
It is. Like a surgeon using their tools not to heal, but to disable a vital organ while still following the superficial procedures of surgery. It really highlights how vulnerable constitutions can be when public fear is manipulated and overrides adherence to fundamental principles.
Okay, so once that legal framework was dismantled, the apparatus of terror followed very quickly. Shirer describes these frenzied brown-shirted gangs of the SA just roaming the streets.
Yeah, arresting and beating up and sometimes murdering whomever they pleased. And the police, they looked on without lifting a nightstick.
So this wasn't just random chaos, was it? This was state-sanctioned terror.
No, that's the crucial point Shirer makes. This terror was not a breakdown of state authority. It was carried out with the encouragement and often on the orders of the state. Judges were intimidated. They feared for their own safety if they didn't comply. Göring famously declared that Hitler was the law.
A complete inversion of the state's role,
Yeah.
from protector to oppressor.
Utterly. And the Gestapo, the secret state police, became the ultimate embodiment of this oppression.
How did the Gestapo come about?
It was established by Hermann Göring in Prussia in April 1933. Apparently, an obscure post office employee just trying to create a franking stamp unwittingly coined the terrifying acronym from Geheimstaatspolizei.
Just a bureaucratic abbreviation becoming a symbol of terror.
Exactly. And under Heinrich Himmler, Shirer calls him a mild-mannered but sadistic former chicken farmer who was chief of the SS, and Reinhard Heydrich, his deputy, described as a young man of diabolical cast. Under them, the Gestapo expanded its reach across all of Germany. It came to wield the power of life and death over every German.
And no legal recourse.
None whatsoever. By 1935, the courts ruled that the Gestapo's actions were immune from judicial review. No court could challenge them. They were literally above the law.
So even if you were somehow acquitted in a regular court, you weren't safe. The state had become this complex machine designed purely to crush opposition.
That's absolutely right. Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's deputy Führer, was empowered to take merciless action against anyone judged to have received too light sentences from the courts. This often meant being rearrested and sent to a concentration camp or just executed.
Shirer mentions Pastor Niemöller as an example.
Yes, Martin Niemöller, a prominent Protestant pastor, initially somewhat sympathetic to the Nazis, but then became a vocal critic. He was arrested, tried, and acquitted of the main charges. But as he left the courtroom, he was immediately snatched by the Gestapo and spent the next 7 years in concentration camps. It was the systematic construction of an apparatus of fear and total obedience.
And this control extended to information too, right? The press, radio.
Absolutely, total control. Dr. Goebbels' propaganda ministry issued daily directives to all media outlets, telling them what news to print and suppress, how to write the news and headline it, complete control over the narrative.
And there were laws enforcing this.
The Reich Press Law of October 1933, it mandated that all editors and journalists had to be politically and racially clean. They had to be of proven Aryan descent and couldn't be married to a Jew. This led to the rapid suppression or Nazification of independent newspapers. Venerable liberal papers like the Vossische Zeitung and Berliner Tageblatt were quickly shut down.
So the state isn't just controlling politics and security, it's actively reshaping the entire society. What was the impact on education? That seems like a prime target for indoctrination.
It was catastrophic. German education suffered a profound decline. History textbooks were completely rewritten, falsified to fit the Nazi narrative, and bizarre subjects like racial sciences became central.
Racial sciences, what did that even entail?
It was pure pseudoscience, designed to exalt Germans as the master race and portray Jews as the source of almost all the evil in the world. Shirer gives this incredible example. The University of Berlin's new rector was a stormtrooper and a veterinarian.
And a veterinarian running a major university.
Yes. He introduced 25 new courses in Rassenkunde racial science and apparently 86 courses related to his own profession, veterinary medicine. Meanwhile, distinguished scientists, Nobel laureates like Albert Einstein, James Franck, they were fired or forced into retirement.
And they even tried to Nazify actual science.
They did. They promoted concepts like German physics, German chemistry, German mathematics. The idea was that science itself was somehow racial and conditioned by blood. Objective truth was irrelevant. As a result, university student enrollment plummeted by more than half between 1933 and 1939. The best minds fled or were silenced.
That's an astonishing level of ideological intrusion, just gutting the intellectual life of the country. How did this radical shift impact the economy? Germany was still recovering from the Depression.
The economy was systematically redirected, repurposed for one goal: war. Dr. Hilmar Schacht, initially seen as a respectable financier, was appointed plenipotentiary general for war economy. He directed the economic preparations for war, even in peacetime.
And how was this financed? Germany was broke.
Schacht famously boasted, "Our armaments are partially financed with the credits of our political enemies." He was referring to confiscated Jewish property and funds, blocked foreign accounts, essentially theft on a massive scale.
Even popular projects were subverted, like the Volkswagen.
The people's car. It was this huge propaganda project promising affordable cars for ordinary Germans. Workers paid millions of marks in installments through a savings scheme, but Shirer reveals not a single car was ever delivered to a paying customer before the war. The factory was used to produce military vehicles and war goods instead.
So the workers were just ripped off.
Completely. Yet, Shirer notes that German workers, perhaps accustomed to centuries of regimentation and desperate after the Depression, mostly accepted their industrial serfdom. They were just thankful, he suggests, to have a job again, even under those conditions.
It's incredible how that promise of economic stability, even a false one, could override such exploitation. What about the youth? They must have been a primary target.
Absolutely. Indoctrinating the next generation was crucial. By 1939, membership in the Hitler Youth became compulsory for all eligible young people. They were drilled in Nazi ideology, physical fitness, military preparedness.
And the girls, too.
Yes, the League of German Girls, the BDM. Their leaders lectured girls on their moral and patriotic duty of bearing children for Hitler's Reich within wedlock if possible, but without it if necessary. Producing future soldiers and mothers for the Reich was paramount. There were also elite boarding schools, the Adolf Hitler schools, established to train future party and public service leaders under intense Spartan discipline.
And even culture, religion. Nothing was left untouched.
Nothing. There was an attempt to create a German Christian movement, a national Reich church. Its proponents demanded the removal of all crucifixes, Bibles, and pictures of saints from altars. What would replace them? Mein Kampf, to the German nation and therefore to God the most sacred book, and a sword. The Christian cross was to be superseded by the only unconquerable symbol, the swastika.
That's just breathtakingly blasphemous. Did it succeed?
Not entirely. Many devout Christians, both Protestant and Catholic, resisted. But the attempt shows the totality of the ambition. And in the arts, many artists, writers, musicians fled Germany. But some prominent figures remained. Conductors like Wilhelm Furtwängler, the composer Richard Strauss, they lent their names and prestige to Goebbels' cultural apparatus, what Shirer calls the prostituting of culture.
So High culture continued, but under Nazi control.
Classical music and opera, particularly Wagner, continued to be performed magnificently. Shirer suggests this offered a kind of distraction for some Germans from the degradation of the other arts and the brutality elsewhere. But even art was subject to Hitler's personal whim. At the first exhibition of approved Nazi art in 1937, he declared his intention not to discuss these matters, but to make decisions. Shirer recounts reports that Hitler even kicked holes through modern paintings he disliked.
This is truly the totalitarian ideal realized, isn't it? A state that seeks to control not just actions, but thoughts, values, identity itself.
It is. Like that sculptor analogy you used earlier, controlling the quarry, the tools, the training, the definition of beauty itself. This wholesale re-engineering of society demonstrates how ideology, once it gains power, seeks to replicate itself everywhere, destroying individual liberty, critical thought, dissent.
It really forces a question. When a state systematically corrupts education, suppresses free thought, dictates cultural norms like this, what are the long-term consequences for a society's capacity for independent thought, for moral judgment, for simple resilience?
Those consequences are deep, damaging, and take generations to heal, if ever fully.
Okay, so having established this absolute internal control, crushing all dissent, Hitler now turns his focus outward, to foreign policy, to dismantling the post-World War I order.
Exactly. This is where we see the systematic testing of boundaries, the deception, the brinkmanship that leads directly to war.
Yeah.
We need to trace these strategic choices, the miscalculations, the moral compromises by various nations that paved that road.
Hitler's first major international test came with rearmament, didn't it? Openly defying Versailles. How did the world react?
On March 16th, 1935, he just announced it. Conscription, the creation of a 36-division army, a flagrant violation of the Versailles Treaty, and the international response. Shirer describes it as a series of empty gestures.
Empty gestures. Like what?
Well, Britain, France, and Italy met at Stresa and condemned Germany's actions, the Stresa Front. The League of Nations appointed a committee to study the problem. France signed mutual assistance pacts with Soviet Russia and Czechoslovakia, but there were no sanctions, no real consequences. Hitler, Shirer concludes, had simply gotten away with his gamble.
And he followed this up with one of his famously deceptive peace speeches, right? Trying to calm everyone down.
Classic Hitler tactic. May 21st, 1935. He gave this speech to the Reichstag that Shirer calls eloquent and certainly one of the cleverest and most misleading orations he ever gave. He rejected war as senseless, useless, as well as a horror, all while secretly accelerating war preparations. Pure psychological warfare.
And then, less than a year later, he took an even bolder step, remilitarizing the Rhineland.
March 7th, 1936. He repudiated the Locarno Treaty, which had guaranteed the borders set by Versailles, and sent German troops back into the demilitarized Rhineland zone along the French border.
A direct challenge to France and international law. How was it received in Germany?
With hysterical approval in the Reichstag, Shirer says. But Hitler himself later confessed something interesting. He said the 48 hours after the march into the Rhineland were the most nerve-wracking of his life.
Really? Why? He seemed so bold.
He admitted that if the French had marched, Germany would have had to withdraw ignominiously. He said a retreat on our part would have spelled collapse. In reality, only 3 infantry battalions actually crossed the Rhine bridges initially. It was a massive bluff.
And Allied intelligence overestimated German strength.
Greatly. More importantly, France, despite having the military superiority to easily push the Germans out, did not act. Political paralysis, fear of war, they blinked, and Hitler won again.
This whole period really demonstrates that salami-slicing tactic of aggression, doesn't it? Take a small, calculated risk. See if anyone reacts forcefully. If not, take the next slice.
Precisely. Each unchallenged violation of treaties, of norms, it just emboldens the aggressor. It erodes the collective will to resist. Like a dam developing small cracks, you ignore them, and eventually the whole thing breaches catastrophically.
It makes you ask, how does that hesitation by the international community, that failure to act decisively against early aggressions, how does it contribute to escalating conflict? What role does that perceived lack of resolve play?
It plays a huge role. It signals weakness. It encourages the aggressor to push further next time.
So while Hitler was challenging external powers, he was also busy consolidating his internal control, especially over the military traditionalists who might resist his war plans.
Yes, that was crucial. Shirer reveals that Hitler's decision, stated in a secret meeting on November 5, 1937, to use armed force against Austria and Czechoslovakia soon, even risking war with Britain and France. This shocked some of his own people.
Like who?
His own foreign minister, Baron von Neurath, apparently suffered several heart attacks during the meeting. The war minister, Blomberg, and the army commander-in-chief, Frisch, also expressed strong reservations about Germany's readiness for a major war. This highlighted the internal opposition from the more cautious traditional military and diplomatic establishment.
So Hitler clearly felt he needed to remove these potential obstacles from within his own ranks. This led to the infamous Blomberg-Frisch affair in early 1938.
Exactly, a sordid affair, manufactured crises used to purge the military leadership. First, Field Marshal von Blomberg, the war minister. He married his secretary, Margrethe Grün, who, it turned out, had a past as a prostitute and had posed for pornographic pictures.
And this information surfaced.
A police file detailing her past landed on the desk of General Wilhelm Keitel. Instead of informing Blomberg or General von Frisch, the army chief, Keitel gave it to Hermann Goering.
Going. Why him?
Because Goering coveted Blomberg's position, he took the file straight to Hitler. Hitler, supposedly morally outraged, forced Blomberg to resign.
So one down. What about Frisch?
Simultaneously, General von Frisch, the highly respected army commander-in-chief, was framed on completely false charges of homosexuality. The Gestapo, under Himmler and Heydrich, dredged up a convicted homosexual prostitute who claimed Frisch had paid him hush money years earlier.
Was it true?
Not at all. It turned out the accuser had actually blackmailed an army captain named Frisch, similar name, different person, but the damage was done. Despite being eventually acquitted by a secret military court, Frisch was not reinstated. His challenge to Himmler for a duel to defend his honor was suppressed.
It's just ruthless political maneuvering, using personal scandal, fabricated charges, internal rivalries, all to eliminate potential opposition.
It was incredibly effective. Shirer argues this purge dealt a blow to the old aristocratic military hierarchy. The army lost the last vestiges of independence it had tried to guard. It allowed Hitler to abolish the war ministry altogether and create the OKW, the High Command of the Armed Forces, with himself as supreme commander and the subservient Keitel as his chief of staff. Goering and Himmler, of course, capitalized on the opportunity to further their own power.
It's a chilling illustration, isn't it? How consolidating totalitarian power often involves not just external aggression, but also systematically dismantling internal checks and balances, silencing any independent voices within the state itself.
Exactly. And with the generals out of the way, or intimidated, Hitler immediately set his sights on his next target, Austria, his homeland.
Franz von Papen, Germany's ambassador in Vienna at the time, he seemed to know what was coming.
He did. Papen was dismissed shortly before the final moves against Austria, but Shirer notes he shrewdly began depositing copies of his sensitive diplomatic correspondence with Hitler in a safe place, a bank in Switzerland. He was well aware of the defamatory campaigns of the Third Reich and wanted insurance. Even those within the system knew how Hitler operated.
So what was Hitler's move against Austria? The Anschluss.
It began with intense psychological pressure. On February 12, 1938, Hitler summoned the Austrian Chancellor, Kurt von Schuschnigg, to his mountain retreat, the Berghof.
And it wasn't a friendly chat.
Far from it. Shirer reconstructs the meeting based on accounts. Hitler launched into this furious tirade. He told Schuschnigg, "I am telling you that I am going to solve the so-called Austrian problem one way or the other." He threatened that Austria's ridiculous defense mechanisms will be blown to bits in one single night.
Just pure bullying. Did he mention the other powers?
Yes, he emphasized Austria's complete isolation, claimed Italy was on his side and that England and France wouldn't lift a finger to help. He presented Schuschnigg with a 2-day ultimatum, demanding concessions, like appointing Austrian Nazis to key government posts. Either we find a solution now, or else events will take their course.
A truly brutal display of power, coercing consent through threats. Schuschnigg must have been utterly humiliated.
Completely. Shirer recounts that after the humiliating meeting, Schuschnigg was told the official press release would simply state that the Führer and Reichskanzler conferred with the Austrian Bundeskanzler at the Berghof, covering up the intimidation.
Papen's comment afterwards is quite revealing.
Yes, Papen accompanied Schuschnigg back towards the border. Trying to lighten the oppressive silence in the car, he apparently exclaimed, "Well, now you have seen what the Führer can be like at times, but the next time I'm sure it will be different. You know, the Führer can be absolutely charming."
Charming. It just speaks volumes about the psychological manipulation, the attempt to normalize this aggression.
Absolutely. Schuschnigg, back in Vienna, initially tried to resist. He made a defiant speech on February 24th saying, "Thus far and no further, Red, white, red until we're dead.
His last stand.
His last act of open resistance. Hitler was furious. He accelerated his plans. On March 11, Schuschnigg, under immense pressure and abandoned by the West, resigned. Hitler issued Directive Number 1 for Operation Otto, the military invasion.
And Mussolini. Italy had previously guaranteed Austrian independence.
Hitler needed Mussolini's approval. He sent a message. Mussolini quickly reassured Hitler that Italy wouldn't intervene. Hitler was overjoyed, reportedly exclaiming to his envoy, "Tell Mussolini I will never forget him for this."
So the path was clear.
German troops marched into Austria on March 12, met mostly with cheering crowds, carefully orchestrated by the Austrian Nazis. The Anschluss, the Union, was declared.
And the vote that followed to legitimize it.
A complete farce. The plebiscite held on April 10 showed these ridiculously high Ja votes, 99.75% in Austria, 99.08% in Germany. But Shirer emphasizes the vote's integrity was zero. Polling stations were often open, not secret. Stormtroopers were watching. There was widespread fear of retribution for voting no. Austria's name was abolished. It became the Ostmark, a province of Germany. Hitler attributed it all to God's will.
The Anschluss is just a textbook case, isn't it? International bullying, psychological warfare, leading to this coerced consent.
It really is. Like a predator meticulously isolating its prey, showing its overwhelming power, then framing the victim's capitulation as a voluntary act. It reveals that profound moral dilemma faced by small nations when they're abandoned by supposed allies, forced to choose between futile resistance and humiliating absorption.
And fresh from his success with Austria, Hitler immediately turned his sights on Czechoslovakia, right?
Immediately. No pause at all. His secret directive for Case Green, the plan against Czechoslovakia, was issued shortly after the Anschluss. It outlined plans to smash Czechoslovakia quickly.
How? What were the methods outlined?
Either through lightning action following an incident, which Germany would manufacture, or by increasing diplomatic controversies and psychological pressure until Czechoslovakia broke. Crucially, the directive aimed to shift war guilt on the enemy.
So propaganda was key from the start.
Absolutely. It emphasized propaganda warfare to intimidate the Czechs and influence neutral countries, and also economic warfare to hasten the collapse while preserving Czech industrial assets for German use, a fully integrated plan, military, political, psychological, economic.
In May 1938, there was a moment of tension. Reports of German troop movements led to a partial Czech mobilization.
Yes, the May crisis. It actually sent Hitler into a fit of fury because it looked like he'd been forced to back down, even though the troop reports were exaggerated. It hardened his resolve to destroy Czechoslovakia.
What was the international response to this crisis?
Britain and France applied diplomatic pressure on Hitler, urging restraint. But Shirer notes that the British ambassador in Berlin, Neville Henderson, told the Germans that while France would likely aid Czechoslovakia if attacked, Britain only warned vaguely that it was impossible to foresee whether Britain would not be drawn into it.
Not exactly a firm commitment.
No. Shirer believes this ambiguity, particularly from British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, was a fatal mistake. He thinks if Chamberlain had frankly told Hitler that Britain would fight over Czechoslovakia, Hitler might have paused. Instead, the lack of clarity emboldened him.
And this hesitation was seized upon, wasn't it? The pressure shifted onto the Czechs themselves.
Exactly. During the summer of 1938, Britain sent Lord Runciman on a mission to Prague, ostensibly to mediate between the Czech government and the Sudeten Germans, the ethnic German minority demanding autonomy. But the mission ended up putting enormous pressure on the Czechs to make concessions to Hitler's demands regarding the Sudetenland.
Meanwhile, Hitler was preparing for war.
Actively. He was urging Hungary to get ready to join the Czech feast, telling the Hungarian regent, Admiral Horthy, "He who wants to sit at the table must at least help in the kitchen." And the OKW, the German High Command, was busy drawing up detailed plans for a staged incident that could be used as a pretext for military intervention.
All leading up to the infamous Munich Agreement, September 1938.
Yes. Chamberlain flew to Germany 3 times in September, first to Berchtesgaden, then to Godesberg, finally to Munich. At Godesberg, Chamberlain thought he had met Hitler's demands for the Sudetenland to be ceded to Germany, but he was confronted by Hitler in a rage.
The carpet eater incident.
That's the story. Hitler seemed highly nervous, on the edge of a nervous breakdown, supposedly chewing the edge of the carpet in fury. He declared Chamberlain's plan, which involved a gradual transfer, was no longer of any use. He wanted immediate occupation.
So Munich was the culmination, September 29-30.
Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. No Czech representatives were allowed in the room while their country's fate was decided. They agreed to Hitler's demands for the immediate German occupation of the Sudetenland.
Chamberlain returned proclaiming peace for our time. Daladier.
The French premier, Edouard Daladier, apparently left Munich a completely beaten and broken man. He knew what they had done.
Munich is the quintessential example of appeasement, isn't it? Prioritizing a false sense of peace over confronting aggression, like feeding the monster hoping it will be satisfied.
Only to find its appetite grows with each meal, absolutely. But even after Munich, Czechoslovakia wasn't completely gone, just dismembered and weakened.
But Hitler wasn't finished.
Not at all. In March 1939, separatist movements in Slovakia and Ruthenia, the eastern parts of the country, intensified, actively fomented by Germany. The Czech government in Prague, in a last desperate attempt to hold the state together, suppressed these movements militarily.
And Hitler seized on that.
As the perfect pretext, he summoned the elderly Czech president, Emil Hácha, to Berlin and subjected him to hours of brutal threats and intimidation until Hácha, reportedly suffering heart trouble, agreed to place the fate of Bohemia and Moravia trustingly in the hands of the Führer. German troops marched in on March 15, 1939.
And Hitler's reaction.
He signed the order establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, effectively annexing the rest of the Czech lands. He apparently exclaimed to his secretaries, "Children, this is the greatest day of my life. I shall go down in history as the greatest German."
The greatest German.
Shirer grimly notes the road to war stretched just ahead. Britain and France, shocked by this blatant violation of the Munich Agreement, finally realized appeasement had failed. They offered guarantees to Poland, Hitler's next likely target. But it was too late to save Czechoslovakia.
This whole episode, from Munich to the final occupation, it just showcases a profound failure of critical thinking by Western leaders, doesn't it? Clinging to this desired reality, this hope for peace, over the undeniable evidence of Hitler's actual intentions.
It really does, and it forces that question again. When is a diplomatic agreement a genuine path to peace? And when is it merely a postponement of conflict that emboldens an aggressor? How can leaders possibly discern between legitimate compromise and dangerous, fatal capitulation?
Difficult questions, with no easy answers, even looking back.
And with Czechoslovakia now dismantled, the stage was absolutely set for the ultimate catastrophe, World War II. We now need to look at the final decisive steps that ignited that war. The cynical alliances, the calculated deceptions, the rapid military innovations that defined its opening phase.
Hitler's next target was clearly Poland. We know he told the Polish foreign minister, Colonel Josef Beck, back in January 1939, Danzig is German, will sooner or later become part of Germany.
Yes, the demand for the return of the free city of Danzig, modern Gdańsk, and an extraterritorial corridor across the Polish corridor connecting Germany to East Prussia became the public pretext. But Beck, despite Hitler's outwardly conciliatory mood at that meeting, was pessimistic.
Shirer is quite critical of Beck's own attitudes, though, isn't he?
Very critical. He points out Beck was violently anti-Russian, disliked the French, and actually felt some warm sympathy for the Nazis, at least initially. Crucially, Beck mistakenly believed the Russians were of no military value. Shirer calls this unbelievable stupidity and fatal short-sightedness. It left Poland strategically isolated and vulnerable.
Meanwhile, other diplomatic efforts were failing. Roosevelt's appeal.
President Roosevelt appealed directly to Hitler in April 1939, asking for assurances against further aggression. Hitler responded with another long, sarcastic propaganda masterpiece speech in the Reichstag, which fooled no foreign governments but played well at home. More significantly, a major shift was happening in Moscow.
The change in Soviet foreign commissar.
Exactly. On May 3, Maxim Litvinov, who was Jewish and a strong advocate for collective security against fascism with the West, was suddenly dismissed. He was replaced by Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's dour right-hand man. This signaled a profound shift in Soviet foreign policy. It opened the door for German overtures.
And Hitler walked right through that door, didn't he? Leading to the almost unthinkable. A pact between Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union. Two mortal ideological enemies.
Utterly unthinkable to most observers at the time. But behind the scenes, talks intensified rapidly in August 1939. From August 15th to 21st, German officials hinted strongly to the Soviets about an understanding with Russia on the fate of Poland. Stalin, wary of the West after Munich and seeing a chance to gain territory in time, eagerly agreed to a visit by the German foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop.
And the meeting in Moscow, August 23rd.
Ribbentrop flew to Moscow. He and Stalin apparently hit it off immediately, finding themselves in accord on their mutual cynicism and territorial ambitions. Shirer recounts Stalin even proposed a toast to Hitler, saying, "I know how much the German nation loves its Führer."
Incredible. And the pact itself.
The non-aggression pact was signed. Publicly, it was just an agreement not to attack each other. But the real bombshell was in a secret additional protocol.
What did the secret protocol say?
It detailed the cynical division of Eastern Europe between Germany and the Soviet Union. Poland was to be partitioned. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Bessarabia, part of Romania, were assigned to the Soviet sphere of influence. Lithuania, initially to the German sphere, later traded.
So they literally carved up Eastern Europe between them.
They did. The Anglo-French military missions, who were in Moscow at that very time trying belatedly to negotiate an alliance with Stalin, were abruptly told by Marshal Voroshilov that their talks were now useless due to the changed political situation.
This pact, it's just a profound moral and strategic paradox, isn't it?
Mhm.
A cynical alliance of convenience between ideological enemies.
Completely, like two rival gangs temporarily putting aside their hatred to jointly rob a bank, knowing full well they'll turn on each other later.
Stalin's justification.
He later argued it bought the Soviet Union peace for our country for 1.5 years and gave them an opportunity of preparing our forces, which it did to some extent. But Shirer forcefully argues this deal also directly enabled Hitler's aggression, led to the destruction of the Polish and French armies, and ultimately left Britain standing alone against the full might of Nazi Germany for a critical year. It demonstrates how, in that kind of power vacuum, even the most fundamental ideological opposition can be sacrificed for perceived short-term strategic gain, often with devastating long-term consequences.
It really makes you think. When nations engage in these pacts with Satan, prioritizing short-term gains over ethics or alliances, what are the inevitable costs for themselves and for the global order?
History suggests those costs are usually immense.
Okay, so with the Soviet Union effectively neutralized by the pact, Poland is isolated. Hitler had already made his decision for war clear to his generals back in May 1939.
Yes, on May 23rd, he bluntly told his military chiefs that further successes can no longer be attained without the shedding of blood. War was inevitable, and he clarified the goal. Danzig is not the subject of the dispute at all. It is a question of expanding our living space in the East, of securing our food supplies. He predicted a life-and-death struggle with England and France would likely follow.
And to provide a justification, a pretext, for this inevitable aggression, they orchestrated that elaborate deception, the Gleiwitz incident.
The Gleiwitz incident, August 31st, 1939, codenamed Operation Himmler. It was a completely faked attack on a German radio station near the Polish border. SS and Gestapo agents, led by Alfred Najak Shirer, calls him a university-educated intellectual gangster, staged the attack. They used concentration camp inmates, dressed them in Polish uniforms, shot them, and left their bodies as evidence of Polish aggression.
Just utterly cynical and bizarre.
Designed purely, as Shirer says, to justify before the world the planned aggression. A manufactured casus belli.
Yet, even with all these plans locked in, there's a brief pause right at the end. The invasion was postponed.
Yes, originally scheduled for August 26th, Hitler postponed it on August 25th for a few days. Two main reasons. First, Britain unexpectedly formalized its alliance with Poland into a full mutual assistance pact that very day. Second, Mussolini informed Hitler that Italy was completely unprepared for a major war and couldn't join in immediately.
Mussolini's famous shopping list.
Chuckles. Yes, he sent this absurdly long list of raw materials Italy would need from Germany before it could possibly fight 7 million tons of petroleum, 6 million tons of coal, etc., amounts Germany couldn't possibly supply. Shirer suggests Mussolini also didn't want war to interfere with his planned World Exhibition of 1942 in Rome.
So Italy's unreadiness and Britain's firming alliance gave Hitler a momentary pause. But the deceptions continued right up to the wire.
Oh yes, Hitler made a show of negotiating. On August 29th, Ribbentrop met with the British ambassador Henderson. In a stormy meeting, Ribbentrop read out a complex 16-point German proposal for a Polish settlement at top speed, deliberately making it hard to understand.
And refused to give Henderson a copy.
Refused, then declared it was already out of date anyway, because a Polish plenipotentiary with full powers hadn't arrived in Berlin by midnight, a deadline that was impossible for Poland to meet, as they hadn't even received the proposals. Shirer calls this Hitler's final act of trickery, a completely bogus ultimatum designed to fail.
And then the order to attack.
At noon on August 31st, Hitler formally signed the order. Attack Poland at dawn the next day, September 1st. General Halder, the Army Chief of Staff, noted grimly in his diary, "Intervention of West said to be unavoidable. In spite of this, Führer has decided to attack."
So September 1st, 1939, the invasion begins.
At daybreak, German armies poured across the Polish frontier from multiple directions. Simultaneously, the Luftwaffe initiated sudden death and destruction from the skies on Polish airfields, communication centers, and even open cities. Shirer, who was in Berlin, noted a sense of apathy among the public, a stark contrast to the patriotic fervor of 1914.
And this was the word's first real brutal demonstration of the Blitzkrieg, wasn't it? Lightning War, a completely new kind of warfare.
It was devastatingly effective against Poland. Within days, the Polish army, though fighting bravely, was practically beaten. The Blitzkrieg involved this incredible coordination: fireplanes clearing the skies, Stuka dive bombers acting as mobile artillery, mass tank formations punching through lines. General Heinz Guderian became famous here, followed by motorized infantry exploiting the breakthroughs, all linked by sophisticated radio communications.
The Polish defenses, based on older ideas, just couldn't cope.
They couldn't. Shirer paints the tragic image of Polish cavalry, bravely charging with long lance against the tank's long cannon, heroic but utterly futile against mechanized warfare.
The invasion of Poland. It wasn't just a military campaign, was it? It was this brutal demonstration of new warfare, a profound betrayal of norms, justified by outright lies like Gleiwitz.
Absolutely. It highlights how quickly moral boundaries can dissolve when a state commits itself to its own distorted logic. How overwhelming force combined with calculated propaganda can just shatter a nation's ability to resist.
And Poland's agony wasn't even over with the German invasion from the west.
No. On September 17th, fulfilling their secret agreement with Hitler, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Molotov had initially told the Germans on September 5th it was not yet a suitable time for them to intervene. But by September 8th, with German forces advancing rapidly towards the agreed demarcation line, Ribbentrop was pressing the Soviets to act.
So the Soviets moved in to claim their share of the spoils.
Exactly. This led to the formal German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty, signed on September 28th, which finalized the partition of Poland and adjusted the spheres of influence agreed upon in the secret protocol. Poland ceased to exist as an independent state.
So Poland falls tragically quickly. And then we enter this strange period, often called the Phony War or the Sitzkrieg, sitting war. What exactly was happening in the West? What was Hitler's strategy now, and how did the Allies respond, or fail to respond?
Right, after the rapid conquest of Poland, there was this eerie lull on the main Western front for about 7 months. Hitler actually made another peace overture to Britain and France on October 6, 1939.
Another peace offer.
Seriously?
Yes, in a speech to the Reichstag, he declared, "I can see no reason why this war must go on." He offered no concrete terms, just vague assurances. Shirer notes that many Germans believed it was a generous offer from the victor, but foreign governments weren't fooled this time. They rejected it, demanding German withdrawal from Poland and Czechoslovakia as a precondition for talks.
But despite rejecting his offer, the Allies didn't actually launch a major attack, did they? There was this puzzling lack of action. Shirer points to a chasm between stated intentions and actual capabilities in the West. That's a key point. The Anglo-French military missions that had been in Moscow trying to negotiate with Stalin before the Nazi-Soviet pact, Shirer reveals they were handled with skepticism, particularly by Britain. Their delegation wasn't exactly top tier.
Who was sent?
An admiral practically on the retired list, a general described as purely a combat officer, not a strategist, and an air marshal noted as an outstanding pilot and instructor, but not as a strategist. Shirer suggests their mission seemed more geared towards ascertaining the fighting value of the Soviet forces than actually making concrete agreements. It lacked urgency.
And the French military assessment.
The French commander-in-chief, General Gamelin, admitted to his government that he couldn't mount a serious, large-scale offensive against Germany's western defenses in less than about 2 years. He estimated not being ready until 1941 or 1942.
2 years. That's incredible hesitation. Did the Germans see this as an opportunity missed by the Allies?
German generals later agreed. They said the Allies missed a golden opportunity by not launching a major attack in the West while the bulk of the German army was occupied in Poland. Germany's western defenses were relatively thin at that point.
So Hitler was planning his next move against the West while the Allies were just sitting there, strategically paralyzed.
Largely, yes. Hitler himself, though determined to attack in the West, kept postponing the offensive, case yellow, repeatedly between November 1939 and January 1940. 14 times, according to Shirer.
Why the delays?
Mostly due to bad weather, which would hinder the Luftwaffe and tank operations, but also because Hitler himself kept tinkering with the invasion plans, never quite satisfied. There was also a brief, embarrassing moment when the King of the Belgians and the Queen of the Netherlands offered joint peace mediation, which Hitler had to politely decline.
And meanwhile, there were still anti-Nazi elements trying to warn the West.
Yes, Shirer mentions conspirators within the German government and military, like Karl Gordeler and Ernst von Weizsäcker, who secretly passed warnings to King Leopold of Belgium about the impending German attack through the Low Countries. But these warnings weren't always heeded or acted upon effectively.
And there was even an assassination attempt on Hitler during this phony war period.
Yes, the beer hall bomb. November 8, 1939, exactly 16 years after the failed putsch. Hitler was giving his annual speech to the Old Guard party veterans in the Burger Bräukeller in Munich. He finished his speech earlier than planned and left. Minutes later, a powerful time bomb planted in a pillar behind the speaker's platform exploded. It killed 7 Nazis and injured 63.
Hitler escaped just by chance.
By minutes, Goebbels immediately blamed the British Secret Service. As a result, Himmler ordered the kidnapping of 2 British intelligence officers, Stevens and Best, who were operating in Holland. They were lured into a trap near the German border by SS officer Walter Schellenberg, who was posing as an anti-Nazi German general, offering to help them overthrow Hitler.
So this whole phony war period, it really highlights this vast gap, doesn't it, between the Allies' stated outrage and their actual ability or willingness to act decisively, between moral condemnation and strategic paralysis.
It really does. While Hitler was acting with ruthless pragmatism, despite his own hesitations and tinkering, the Western Allies seemed bogged down by political caution, military unpreparedness, and perhaps outdated strategic thinking. It led to these critical missed opportunities. It's a stark reminder that good intentions, moral superiority even, are often insufficient without decisive, coordinated action.
It brings back that question. In moments of international crisis, when is it morally imperative to act, even at great risk? And when is caution the more responsible path? How do leaders balance those impossible demands? And what are the devastating consequences of getting it wrong?
Those are the burdens of leadership in such times.
So as the phony war dragged on, Hitler made his next move, not yet in the west, but northwards, to secure his flank and vital resources.
Exactly, Denmark and Norway. German naval officers in particular had been pushing for this. Admiral Rolf Karls recognized the strategic importance of Norway. Controlling its coast would secure the vital winter route for Swedish iron ore shipments crucial for German war industry coming out of the Norwegian port of Narvik. It would also give the German Navy access to the North Atlantic for operations against British shipping.
So Raeder, the head of the Navy, proposed this early on.
Admiral Raeder proposed an occupation of the Norwegian coast as early as October 1939. He even suggested doing it with the combined Prussian of Russia and Germany, which didn't happen, but the idea was there.
And what finally triggered Hitler's decision to invade? Shirer mentions the Altmark incident.
Yes, February 1940. The Altmark was a German supply ship carrying around 300 British merchant seamen who had been captured by the pocket battleship Graf Spee. The Altmark was trying to sneak back to Germany through neutral Norwegian territorial waters. A British destroyer, HMS Cossack, intercepted it, boarded it despite Norwegian protests, and rescued the prisoners.
A daring rescue, but a violation of neutrality.
It was. And it convinced Hitler that Norway either couldn't or wouldn't seriously resist a British violation of its neutrality. He feared the Allies might occupy Norway first to cut off the iron ore. This solidified his decision for Operation Weserübung, the code name for the simultaneous invasion of Norway and Denmark.
And the planning was famously unconventional.
Chuckles, yes. The commander appointed to lead the invasion, General Nicholas von Falkenhorst, knew nothing about Norway. When summoned by Hitler and given the task, he apparently went out and bought a Baedeker travel guide to figure out the geography and plan the complex land, sea, and air operation.
Incredible. And Hitler decided to launch this before the main attack in the West.
Yes. Initially, he wasn't sure which offensive to launch first, but reports, which turned out to be somewhat exaggerated, of an impending Anglo-French expeditionary force preparing to land in Norway, ostensibly to help Finland in its winter war against the Soviets, but potentially seizing Narvik, spurred him to act. Weserübung would proceed case yellow.
The invasion itself, April 9th, 1940. How did it go in Denmark?
Denmark capitulated almost immediately, within hours. German forces crossed the border, landed by sea and air. Shirer mentions the German commander, General Heimer, calling for bombers to zoom over Copenhagen to intimidate the Danish government into accepting surrender terms. Apparently, this did not fail to make their impression. The capitulation announcement was even broadcast quickly on a German transmitter using Danish wavelength.
So Denmark fell without a fight. Norway was different.
Much different and much more complex. The German minister in Oslo, Dr. Breuer, tried to bully the Norwegian government into surrender. But then Vidkun Quisling, the head of Norway's small fascist party, seized the opportunity and proclaimed himself head of a new collaborationist government, ordering all resistance to halt.
Quisling. His name became synonymous with traitor.
Indeed. But ironically, Shirer notes, Quisling's treasonous act actually backfired on the Germans initially. It so outraged the Norwegian king, Håkon VII, the government, and the public that it paradoxically rallied the stunned Norwegians to resist. King Håkon famously refused to surrender or appoint Quisling, and the government fled north, continuing the fight.
So despite the surprise attack and Quisling's treachery, there was heroic Norwegian resistance.
Formidable and heroic resistance, yes, especially considering the circumstances. The Allies tried to help, but their response was mixed. The British Navy reacted sharply at Narvik, sinking several German destroyers in 2 fierce battles. But the British Army commander sent to land troops there, Major General Mackesy, was exceedingly cautious, according to Shirer. He delayed landing his troops directly at Narvik, a costly error that allowed the Germans to consolidate their position.
Ultimately, though, Germany succeeded in conquering both countries. What were the strategic gains?
They were significant. The swift conquest secured those vital iron ore routes. It protected Germany's northern flank and the entrance to the Baltic Sea. It provided the German Navy with crucial bases on the North Atlantic coast for submarines and surface raiders attacking Britain. And it brought German air bases hundreds of miles closer to northern Britain. Militarily, it immensely enhanced the military prestige of the Third Reich, and it sent a chilling message. Neutrality offered no protection against Hitler's forces.
It's another sharp lesson, isn't it? Strategic opportunism, the domino effect of aggression.
Absolutely. Hitler exploited perceived weaknesses, the declared neutrality of small nations, to gain critical resources and strategic advantages. It demonstrates that neutrality is often only as strong as the will of powerful nations to respect or enforce it, and that lack of decisive early action by the Allies had profound, lasting strategic repercussions.
Okay, so Hitler's northern flank is secure. Now, May 10th, 1940, the main event begins. The assault on France and the Low Countries. Case yellow. How did his revolutionary military doctrine reshape the battlefield this time?
Hitler had issued the directive for this offensive back in October 1939. The plan was to attack through neutral Luxembourg, Belgium, and Holland. The main aims were to defeat the French and British forces there, occupy the Channel coast, and secure bases for the air and sea war against England.
And the attack began with characteristic speed and brutality.
Yes, May 10th. Belgium protested the criminal aggression against a neutral and loyal Belgium, emphasizing there was no ultimatum, no warning. The Netherlands was overrun incredibly quickly, capitulating within 5 days on May 15th. This followed the devastating terror bombing of the center of Rotterdam, after the city had actually agreed to surrender terms, a deliberate act to terrorize the population, though Shirer notes the actual death toll was later found to be much lower than initial, wildly inflated reports. Queen Wilhelmina and the Dutch government escaped to London.
And this was the full force of the Blitzkrieg unleashed again, wasn't it? Shattering not just armies, but confidence in traditional defense strategies.
It was Blitzkrieg perfected. The Germans used gliders to silently land troops and seize vital bridges over rivers and canals like the Albert Canal bridges in Belgium. They used paratroopers and glider troops in a daring assault to neutralize the supposedly impregnable Belgian Fort Aben-Email. These pinpoint attacks paralyzed the Allied defense plans.
And the main Allied armies, the French, the British Expeditionary Force, BEF.
Under the overall command of French General Gamelin, the main Allied forces moved forward into Belgium according to their prearranged plan, Plan D, deploying along the Dial River. They expected a repeat of the Schlieffen Plan from World War I, with the main German thrust coming through central Belgium.
But that wasn't the main German thrust this time, was it?
No, that was the genius or the gamble of the Manstein Plan, which Hitler had adopted. While German Army Group B attacked through Holland and Belgium, drawing the best Allied forces northwards, the main German armored punch, Army Group A with 7 panzer divisions, struck through the Ardennes forest further south terrain the Allies considered impassable for tanks.
They punched right through the French lines.
They broke through the weak French defenses along the Meuse River near Sedan around May 13th, 14th, then raced westward towards the English Channel, completely cutting off the Allied armies fighting in Belgium. The speed and power were overwhelming. Allied assumptions about slow, methodical warfare, about the impregnability of the Ardennes, were utterly shattered.
And then came that inexplicable, controversial stop order at Dunkirk, halting the German tanks just short of the coast.
Yes, May 24th. Just as the Panzers were closing in on the trapped BEF and French forces retreating towards the port of Dunkirk, Hitler confirmed an order to halt their advance. The reasons are still debated. General Halder, in his diary, recalled Hitler citing political reasons.
Political reasons, what could they be?
Some historians, including Shirer, suggest Hitler may have wanted the Luftwaffe, Göring's air force, to have the glory of destroying the trapped armies. Others suggest Hitler still harbored a strange, sentimental hope even then of making peace with Britain, maybe preserving the British Empire as a bulwark against Bolshevism or against the USA. Whatever the reason, it was a critical pause.
A pause that allowed the Allies to organize the evacuation.
Operation Dynamo, the miraculous evacuation from Dunkirk. From May 26 to June 4th, an incredible armada of over 850 vessels, warships, ferries, fishing boats, private yachts, everything that could flow across the channel under constant air attack and rescued 338,226 Allied soldiers, mostly British, but over 100,000 French too, from the beaches. Shirer notes the German High Command only fully woke up to the massive scale of the evacuation around May 30th.
A miracle, but also a disaster for France.
A disaster. With the BEF gone and its best armies lost in the north, France rapidly collapsed. The Germans launched their second offensive, Case Red, southwards on June 5th. Paris fell without a fight on June 14th. The French government fled south. A new government was formed under the aged Marshal Pétain, the hero of Verdun in World War I. Believing further resistance futile, Pétain sought an armistice.
And the armistice signing itself was staged for maximum humiliation.
Deliberately. Hitler insisted it be signed on June 21st, 1940, in the exact same railway carriage, brought out of a museum and placed on the precise spot in the forest of Compiègne, where Germany had signed the humiliating armistice of 1918. Shirer was there as a journalist, an eyewitness. He described Hitler's face as he arrived and read the inscription on the French monument commemorating 1918, afire with scorn, anger, hate, revenge, triumph. A magnificent gesture of contempt, Shirer called it. France was effectively divided, the north occupied, the south, under Pétain's collaborationist Vichy regime, essentially a German vassal state. The French-Italian armistice followed 2 days later.
The fall of France. It's just a profound study, isn't it? The psychological, the strategic impact of a revolutionary military doctrine like Blitzkrieg.
It shattered armies, but also confidence in traditional defense. And Hitler's stop order at Dundas, that mix of strategic calculation, maybe hubris, maybe bizarre ideological fantasy, it had these unforeseen consequences that fundamentally altered the war's trajectory. Saving the core of the British Army to fight another day, it just shows the incredible interconnectedness of military strategy, political goals, and even a leader's psychological quirks.
It really makes you ask, how can outdated assumptions about warfare or about politics lead to such catastrophic strategic misjudgments? What lessons does that hold for adapting to rapid, unforeseen change, even today?
Crucial lessons about adaptability, critical assessment of assumptions, and understanding the multifaceted nature of conflict.
So with France fallen, Hitler seemed utterly invincible. Britain stood alone. What was next? Why didn't a direct invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, ever happen?
Well, after France's swift defeat, Hitler genuinely seemed to expect Britain to sue for peace. Shirer notes he waited for word from London that the British government was ready to throw in the sponge. He was confident the war was as good as over. General Halder wrote in his diary that Hitler was obsessed with the question why England does not yet want to take the road to peace.
He just didn't understand British resolve. Or Churchill's.
He seemed baffled by it. He only slowly began to realize Britain's sea-minded nature, its island geography, and its determination under Churchill to fight on.
But the German military must have been planning for an invasion. Operation Sea Lion.
They were ordered to, yes, but there were huge doubts, especially within the German Navy. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder strongly argued against a direct cross-channel invasion. He pointed out the immense difficulties and risks. The German Navy was vastly outnumbered by the Royal Navy, and they lacked specialized landing craft. Controlling the Channel airspace against the RAF would be essential and difficult.
So what did Raeder propose instead?
He advocated for a more indirect strategy, a prolonged submarine and air war to blockade Britain, cut off its vital imports, combined with heavy air attacks on her main centers to cripple morale in industry. Shirer notes that Hitler himself ultimately seemed to view a direct invasion as a last resort, something to be undertaken only if absolutely necessary.
But he still made another appeal for peace.
Yes, on July 19th, 1940, he delivered another major speech to the Reichstag, billed as a last appeal to reason to the British. He portrayed himself magnanimously as the victor speaking in the name of reason. But the speech was vague on actual peace terms. Shirer argues it was mainly intended to buttress morale at home in Germany and maybe achieve a psychological effect among the English people, hoping to perhaps isolate the Churchill government. German officials were apparently convinced Britain would accept this generous offer.
But of course, Britain rejected it flatly.
Completely. Churchill's government didn't even formally reply. The Battle of Britain in the Air was about to begin, the prelude to any possible invasion.
So the failure to even launch Operation Sea Lion marks a really significant turning point, doesn't it? It showed the limits of Germany's land-based power against a determined naval force, against the English Channel, and against the strength of national will embodied by Churchill.
Absolutely. It fundamentally challenged that aura of inevitable victory that Hitler had cultivated. It proved that even a seemingly unstoppable force could be checked. Geographical realities, air power, naval power, national character, they all played a crucial role in altering the course of the conflict.
Shirer also notes some interesting diplomatic reports from this time, reflecting Nazi propaganda efforts even further afield.
Yes, he mentions German diplomatic reports from the U.S. noting, with typical anti-Semitic paranoia, a growing Jewish element supposedly controlling key positions in the American armed forces. And figures like the aviator Charles Lindbergh, who advocated isolationism, were seen hopefully by the Nazis as leading opponents to U.S. involvement. It just illustrates how, even as they contemplated invading Britain, they were also actively trying to shape opinion and undermine potential future enemies through disinformation.
We have covered a truly staggering amount of ground today. We've traced Hitler's journey from this, disaffected, fantasizing youth in Vienna.
Right up to becoming this powerful, seemingly unstoppable dictator on the cusp of dominating Europe.
We've seen how his personal grievances, his warped ideology, and the profound vulnerabilities of the Weimar Republic all converged, creating this political movement unlike any other.
And we dissected the calculated aggression, didn't we? The propaganda, the instruments of terror that define the Third Reich, from the enabling act legally dismantling democracy,
To the purging of the generals, removing internal obstacles,
from the annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia through intimidation and deceit.
to the rapid, brutal invasions of Poland and then Western Europe. We explored that chilling logic behind the Nazi-Soviet pact, that cynical deal, and the profound revolutionary impact of the Blitzkrieg.
Yeah, lightning war.
Understanding this history, it goes so far beyond just memorizing dates and events, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's about recognizing that complex interplay, individual psychology, the slow erosion of democratic norms, the strategic misjudgments of entire nations.
It's just such a stark reminder of how quickly a society can be reshaped
Mm-hmm.
by ideology, by fear, by the relentless, ruthless pursuit of power.
Indeed. And as we close this deep dive, drawing on Shirer's incredible account, I really want to leave you, our listeners, with one big question to reflect on. Given everything we've uncovered, the detailed insights into Hitler's motivations, his methods, the Weltanschauung laid out in Mein Kampf, the clear steps he took, and given the varied responses, or often the lack of response, from other nations, what is the fundamental ethical responsibility of individuals and of states when they are confronted with clear evidence of an aggressively expansionist and ideologically driven power? Does history, as Shirer presents it, suggest that things like pacts with Satan, like the Nazi-Soviet pact, or appeasement like Munich, do they ever truly succeed in preventing the inevitable? Or do they merely delay and perhaps ultimately amplify the eventual catastrophe?
A profound and deeply relevant question to ponder. Thank you for guiding us through that complex history.
Thank you.